Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to ancient Egypt, where the air is thick with incense, the walls are draped in linen, and the most powerful woman in the world smells like cardamom, rose, and maybe a hint of crushed beetle wing. You're not just watching history tonight. You're stepping barefoot onto the cool marble of Cleopatra's palace, where diplomats stammer, poets sigh, and every corridor smells faintly of something exotic and vaguely intimidating. You'll try not to sneeze. As usual, you probably won't survive this world for more than an hour. The food's great, sure, but the dental care is non-existent, and one wrong glance at the queen could earn you a polite but irreversible exile to the desert. And let's not even talk about the plumbing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing that little global clock tick. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just as the Alexandrian sun lowers itself toward the horizon like a lazy golden coin. The harbor outside Cleopatra's palace buzzes with ships from every direction. Rome, India, the Greek islands, even some clunky vessels from far-off Nubia. But inside the palace? Quiet. Heavy curtains filter the light into warm stripes across alabaster floors. Linen robes whisper as they move past you. Every surface, floor, furniture, even the guards, seems to have been dabbed with something fragrant. You trail behind an official who smells like myrrh and disapproval. He mumbles titles as he walks, something about you being an honored observer from an unthreatening foreign land. Very unthreatening, he insists. Extremely neutral. You nod. He leads you through cool halls, past carved columns and into the atrium, where a marble basin holds petals floating lazily in scented water. You're not sure whether to drink from it or wash your hands, so you settle for staring at it meaningfully until someone does one or the other. And then you hear her voice. It's not booming or regal, it's playful, almost conspiratorial. And close. Cleopatra's speaking with her handmaidens, laughing softly at a joke that probably cost some scribe his job. She turns to you and everything slows. You expect grandeur? She offers curiosity. Her dress is simple by royal standards, but her scent. Oh, her scent is a production in itself. Sweet but spicy, floral but warm, with a kind of smoky depth that seems designed to make you forget your own name. You inhale and instantly regret it. Your eyes water just a little. A guard discreetly offers you a linen square to dab your face. It's pre-scented. Of course it is. Cleopatra welcomes you with a nod, and you realize she's testing you. Not your intellect, not your political savvy. Your nose. She's watching your reaction to her carefully blended aura. Will you compliment it? Will you flinch? Will you sneeze? You murmur something vaguely complimentary about garden breezes. She smiles. You're not thrown to the crocodiles. Success. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's famously enchanting presence was more about looks, voice, or scent, but most agree she knew how to use all three like a symphony. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a performance. As you're ushered deeper into the palace, you begin to notice it's not just Cleopatra who smells like a divine offering. Every surface has a lingering note. The floor smells faintly of cedar, the cushions are laced with lavender. Even the ink used by scribes has a faint floral sharpness to it. One scribe glances up from his scroll and offers a polite nod, his hair lightly powdered with some lemony dust. You wonder whether the scent is meant to improve memory or repel insects, or both. Possibly both. You're brought to your quarters. Yes, even observers get quarters. The sheets are linen, of course, and the pillow has been subtly perfumed with lotus. It's supposed to calm the mind. It does. You flop onto the bed and immediately regret the enthusiastic motion. The linens are crisp, and you now smell like a pressed bouquet. As twilight wraps the palace in cooler tones, torches flicker to life, and the aroma shifts again. Evening oils, thicker, smokier. You're told dinner is soon, but for now, someone draws a shallow bath for you. Not for hygiene, though that's a bonus, but to help your body absorb the evening perfumes better. You lower yourself into the tepid water, which has petals, oils, and something else you can't quite place. Maybe citrus, maybe something that used to be citrus. Either way, your skin feels like it's slowly being convinced to join a royal cult of fragrance. From your tub, you hear the distant sounds of lyres tuning up and someone practicing flattery in Greek. You're not expected to speak much tonight. Just observe. Just breathe in. Just absorb. And maybe try not to get too distracted by the fact that the air here has texture. As if every molecule has been weighed, scented, and approved before it touches your face. A gentle knock interrupts your meditative state. It's the same official, still smelling of disapproval and myrrh. Dinner, he says. The queen awaits. Also, there will be more scent-based surprises. He doesn't say that part, but it's in his eyes. You towel off with linen that smells like warm river stones. You slip into borrowed robes that are either infused with mint or extremely well aired. Probably both. And as you follow the official down the flickering halls of Cleopatra's palace, you start to realize this isn't just politics. It's not just hospitality. It's olfactory warfare, and Cleopatra is winning. You're not exactly sure what you expected Cleopatra's private garden to look like. Maybe something modest, some vines, a fig tree, perhaps a carefully trimmed bush shaped like a sphinx. Instead, you're led through a narrow, jasmine-lined walkway that opens suddenly into a sun-drenched oasis, so full of green it feels audacious. A full botanical kingdom, really, hemmed in by limestone walls and thick with flowers, herbs, and trees that definitely don't belong to this climate. The air is syrupy with scent. You breathe in, immediately overwhelmed. Sweet lemon balm, bitter frankincense, wild basil, honeyed blue lotus, maybe even cinnamon bark. Somewhere, something is definitely flowering that smells suspiciously like freshly baked bread. You're not hungry, but you want to eat the entire garden anyway. A gardener, barefoot, sun-wrinkled, and cheerfully indifferent to your presence, passes by carrying a small clay jar filled with thick green paste. He murmurs something about macerating the oud resin, then disappears behind a curtain of hanging lavender. You spot Cleopatra at the far end of the garden, seated beneath a flowering sycamore fig. She's reading a scroll and gently fanning herself with what appears to be a palm leaf dipped in rosewater. She glances up and waves you forward. This, she says, gesturing at the lush surroundings, is my nose's laboratory. It is not modest, it is not subtle, it is, however, impressive. You follow her through a winding path shaded by pomegranate trees and date palms. She stops occasionally to pinch a leaf or stroke the rough bark of a sandalwood sapling. Imported from the Indus, she says proudly. Took nearly 2 years to root properly. She sniffs it and shrugs, still shy. Every plant, she explains, has a mood, not just a scent. Jasmine is flirtatious. Myrrh is thoughtful. Papyrus? Papyrus smells like bureaucracy and should not be used in seduction. Ever. As you walk, a small monkey, yes, a monkey, swings overhead carrying what appears to be a pouch of dried herbs. It flings it down and misses the queen's head by a polite 6 inches. That's for the elephants, she says. They hate mint, but it keeps the flies off. You nod like this is something you've always known. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra's gardens were purely personal or an extension of statecraft. Some argue they were designed as a space for private rituals and aesthetic pleasure. Others believe they functioned as subtle displays of power. After all, if you can get cinnamon trees to grow in the Egyptian sun, you can probably get Roman generals to sit down and listen. You reach a shady stone bench where small bees hum around a cluster of blue lotus flowers. Cleopatra picks one, crushes it between her fingers, and lifts it to your nose. This, she says, is what the gods dream about. You nod again, eyes watering. Fun fact, the blue lotus was mildly psychoactive. Ancient Egyptians used it for everything from religious ceremonies to casual hangouts. It supposedly induced relaxation, mild euphoria, and extremely vivid dreams. some of which featured gods giving out life advice like celestial guidance counselors. You feel a little floaty just from the scent. Cleopatra gestures toward a small clay urn, half buried beneath a flowering shrub. She tells you it contains preserved ambergris, a waxy, strangely valuable substance that comes from the digestive system of sperm whales. It smells like ocean thunder, she says, but only after it's rotted a bit, like good philosophy. You try to look wise. You fail. 2 servants appear with trays of chilled drinks. Yours smells faintly of cardamom and has flower petals floating on top. You sip it cautiously. It tastes like what a perfume bottle might drink if it were parched. Strangely delicious. Cleopatra reclines slightly watching you. Romans don't understand gardens, she muses. They plant for order, squares, symmetry. Their plants are obedient. My plants are ambitious. You glance around. She's not wrong. This is less a garden and more a wild theater production. A turtle clambers slowly over a crushed sandalwood branch, entirely unbothered by your presence. A breeze picks up carrying a swirling mix of lavender, cumin, and something sharper, frankincense perhaps, across your face. It's hypnotic, like standing inside a musical chord made of smells. You ask her if she experiments with all of this. Oh, constantly, she says. Every mood needs a blend, every meeting a scent. When I want to be feared, I wear leather soaked in vetiver. When I want to be adored, well? She trails off, smiling. It's said that Cleopatra's perfume preferences changed daily. Some texts suggest she had personal blends for different hours of the day. Others hint that she used scent to disarm rivals, to court allies, even to soothe herself in moments of grief. There's no consensus, but there are stories. One of your favorite details, which you whisper to yourself as you trail behind her again. Some ancient Egyptian perfumes were so thick and sticky they had to be melted before use. People would store them in little cones that sat on top of the head and slowly drip down throughout the day, releasing scent and probably attracting curious insects. You ask bravely if Cleopatra uses the cones. She laughs. Only when I want someone to notice. The sun begins to sink behind the palace walls. The air cools just enough for the scent of the flowers to lift and shift. You notice the night-blooming jasmine beginning to open its petals. Already it's sending out long, soft trails of sweetness. Cleopatra inhales deeply. That, she says, is the perfume of diplomacy. You believe her. A servant announces something in a low tone. The queen nods, rises, and tells you to follow. It's time to see where the magic happens. You expect a throne room. Instead, she leads you toward a stone stairwell shaded by fig leaves and trellised vines. You descend. The temperature drops. The air thickens. Somewhere below, someone is grinding something with intense purpose. You've reached the laboratory. You descend carefully, hand grazing a smooth stone wall, as the sounds of Alexandria fade behind you, and the cooler air curls around your ankles like a polite ghost. The stairway spirals slowly, lit by flickering oil lamps set into recesses in the walls. Each step carries you deeper into what Cleopatra laughingly calls her little olfactory dungeon. Eventually, the stone gives way to something softer, sand packed into the floor, perhaps to absorb dropped oils or broken jars. You step into a low-ceilinged room with thick wooden beams and strange hanging herbs. The smell? A hurricane of crushed petals, fermented roots, beeswax, and something that might be goat. Or possibly philosopher. It's hard to say. The space is cluttered but orderly. Dozens of amphorae line one wall, each marked in delicate demotic script. Some are sealed with wax, others corked with cloth, and tied in what you suspect is a knot only an experienced priestess or a determined monkey could undo. A long work table dominates the center, covered in bowls, mortars, pestles, tiny spoons, and one very smug-looking cat. The cat eyes you suspiciously. It smells faintly of cinnamon. You suspect this is not accidental. This, Cleopatra says, gesturing with a flair that suggests both pride and mild amusement, is where empires are softened at the edges. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra blended her own perfumes or merely commissioned them from the royal perfumers. Some say she studied with the alchemists of the Serapeum. Others insist she merely offered feedback. Very pointed, very specific feedback. Either way, her involvement in the process is not in doubt. You watch as she picks up a tiny curved blade and begins slicing bark. Cassia, she says, a cousin to cinnamon, but sharper, bolder. It's what you wear, she explains, when you need to speak first in a room full of men who think they invented debate. The sliced bark goes into a small stone bowl, followed by cardamom pods cracked open with the flat of her knife and a few drops of what she calls sun-thickened myrrh. She grinds the mixture in slow circles, the scent rising with every motion. You lean in slightly too far and sneeze, sending a puff of spice into the air. The cat glares. She laughs and hands you a damp cloth soaked in rosewater. Don't inhale unless you mean it. You ask how she knows when a perfume is finished. You don't, she says. Not really. Some you wear and wait. Some you adjust by the hour, and some... She gestures to a dark blue jar sealed with gold wire. You just stop before you ruin the magic. She cracks the seal and wafts a faint plume toward your face. It smells like midnight on a riverbank. Cool, floral, a little melancholic, like memory steeped in honey. I wore this, she says softly, when Julius first arrived. You almost say Julius who, but catch yourself just in time. The memory in her face answers the question. You learn that she's recorded over 24 perfume formulas in her own hand. Not in scrolls, not safe enough, but etched into wax tablets hidden in sealed compartments. She changes the formulas often, sometimes just for fun. Too much rose, you sound desperate. Too much clove, you smell like a merchant trying to close a deal in the rain. She opens another jar. This one smells of almond and smoke. For funerals, she says casually. Not mine, hopefully. You spot a narrow shelf near the far wall lined with tiny clay phials. Some look ancient, even by ancient standards. She tells you those are experimental. Frankincense steeped in honey wine, crushed scarab shells mixed with orchid root, essence of Nile silt. Smells terrible, she warns, but effective against bad dreams. You raise a brow, she shrugs. Dreams are political too. A short scroll sits rolled beside the files, and she offers it to you to examine. It's a list, not ingredients, but emotions. Longing, defiance, grief, hope, and next to each, a blend. You realize this isn't a hobby, it's a lexicon. Cleopatra doesn't just wear perfume, she speaks with it. Rome, she says suddenly, smells of iron and sweat. They don't understand softness, they think it's weakness. You ask what she thinks Rome needs. She smiles, dipping a finger into a small pot of oil thick with crushed violet. Something that makes them remember they're mortal. Something that lingers on their cloak until they wonder if they imagined it. You suspect more than one Roman has returned home confused and vaguely wistful. There's a small chest in the corner guarded by another cat. This one older, rounder, and smelling like cedar. Cleopatra opens it and reveals a row of crystalline vials nested in velvet. These, she says, are for war. You're not sure what war smells like until she opens one. It hits you like thunder. Patchouli, black pepper, burned figure. It's dark and commanding and smells like someone who would absolutely take your ships and your dignity with a handwritten thank you note. You stagger slightly. She caps the bottle and chuckles. Effective, yes? You nod, eyes watering again. A small bell sounds somewhere above. Cleopatra wipes her hands, replaces the lids, and tells you it's time for a different kind of scent lesson. Let's go meet some noses, she says cryptically, leading you back up the stairs. You follow, feeling as though your own sense of smell has just completed military training. You've sniffed grief, diplomacy, seduction, and war. You're ready for anything. Probably. You emerge from the cool, perfumed dark into warm, late afternoon sun, blinking like someone who spent too long in a scented cave. Which, to be fair, you just did. Cleopatra doesn't miss a beat. She adjusts a tiny bottle hanging from her wrist like a charm and leads you along a colonnade toward what she calls the Gallery of Noses. You raise an eyebrow. She only grins. The gallery, it turns out, is not a metaphor. You are quite literally walking into a room filled with marble busts, each one perfectly sculpted, each one prominently featuring one very distinct nose. Some aquiline, some wide, some beaky, some broken, and at least one that looks like it lost a fight with a chariot. It's a whole collection of olfactory personalities. Romans, Cleopatra says, are obsessed with noses. The bigger the better, ideally attached to someone very stern and extremely judgmental. You stifle a laugh. She's not wrong. She pauses in front of a particularly grand nose belonging to a man you recognize vaguely from old coins and dry historical lectures. Pompey the Great, maybe? Or was it someone who tried to be? She doesn't clarify. She just taps the tip of the marble nose thoughtfully. Historians still argue, she says, whether Rome judged character by the nose or if they just pretended to, because the real power was always somewhere else. You lean in, examining the exaggerated ridge and carefully carved nostrils. It's a good nose in the way that stone noses can be good. Cleopatra clearly disagrees. They called mine too small, she says, waving airily. Or too sharp, or too foreign, or too Greek. You'd think I'd tried to conquer the Senate with my septum. There's a faint bitterness beneath the humor. You suspect she's heard enough whispered opinions about her face to wallpaper the entire library of Alexandria. She walks past several more busts, each one labeled in tiny script. One nose was politely stern, another decisively wealthy. One particularly unfortunate profile is simply labeled Senator Number 47 disagreed. Often. You arrive at a low bench nestled between two bronze statues of hawks. Cleopatra sits and gestures for you to join her. She picks up a scroll from the side table, yes, there's furniture even here, and unrolls it. It's a list of nose shapes. Roman, Egyptian, Nubian, Hellenic, Parthian, each paired with personality traits. You read silently. Roman nose, brave, noble, smells danger before it arrives. Egyptian nose, clever, diplomatic, smells politics from a mile away. Greek nose, beautiful but opinionated, smells mostly itself. Parthian nose, mysterious, aggressive, smells like horses and judgment. You blink. These are oddly specific, she shrugs. Science, probably. The conversation turns to the politics of profile. You learn that statues, coins, and portraits were all curated with exquisite care, and nose shape wasn't just about vanity, it was about branding. Want to look heroic? Straighten that bridge. Want to appear generous? Broaden the nostrils slightly. Want to hide a nervous temperament? Never sculpt the nose mid-sniff. Mine? Cleopatra says, tapping the side of her own nose. Was considered untrustworthy by Roman standards. Too subtle, not enough declaration. She doesn't seem too bothered. Fun fact, ancient Romans often made snap judgments about people based on their noses, and a whole cottage industry emerged around physiognomy, the practice of reading moral character from facial features. Cleopatra mocks the idea gently, but acknowledges the pressure. You had to be your own propaganda, she says, preferably with cheekbones. The gallery of noses contains one oddity, a small bronze nose mounted alone on a pedestal. Cleopatra grins at your confused expression. That, she says, belonged to a rival who kept claiming I bewitched Caesar with my perfumes. One day she sneezed at court and blamed me. You ask what happened to her. She's not in the gallery of ears, she replies, and then immediately changes the subject. Back in the heart of the gallery, she shows you a shelf containing tiny clay perfume vessels, each one shaped like a different nose. You blink. Training tools, she explains. You smell through the shape. The scent changes depending on the curve of the clay. It sounds like nonsense. Then she hands you one. an almond-shaped nose filled with crushed marjoram and blue lotus. You sniff. It's soft, sleepy, almost sad. She swaps it for a long Roman-style nose filled with pepper oil and pine resin. You recoil. It smells like an argument in a forest. She chuckles. Perception is architecture. There's a lesson here buried beneath the layers of fragrance and cheeky critique. Cleopatra understands perception like a second language. She knows when to lean into myth, when to soften a room with scent, and when to weaponize an eyebrow. She leans back, tossing a small sachet of lavender toward a brazier where it crackles gently. The scent rises, mellow and grounding. Let the Romans talk about noses, she says. Mine smells victory just fine. As you sit there, surrounded by sculpted profiles and perfumed clay, the sun angles low through the columns, casting long shadows across the floor. The cat from earlier slips silently in and curls up beneath the bust of a particularly majestic nostril. You realize you haven't thought about time in hours. You've wandered through gardens and formulas, profiles and politics, and somehow all of it returns to the same central theme. Power disguised as pleasure. And perfume, worn like a secret. The scent of lavender still lingers as you rise from the bench and follow Cleopatra through a corridor flanked by more busts and the occasional torch bracket. The light softens. The floor grows warmer beneath your sandals, as if the building itself has absorbed centuries of heated conversation. You reach a smaller chamber tucked away like a secret thought. No statues here, just walls lined with polished cedar panels and scroll niches. Cleopatra calls it her scent library. Each shelf is filled with scrolls and tablets, yes, but also little ceramic flasks sealed with beeswax, strips of perfumed linen, fragments of resins wrapped in silk. The room smells like 20 kinds of memory, some happy, some uncomfortable, some too complex to name. She reaches into a compartment and pulls out a long, narrow piece of papyrus with faint ink markings. This, she says, is a recipe for a scent they wore in Thebes during the festival of Oped. It was said to make you dream more vividly. You sniff the edge of the scroll, expecting dust, but no. There's a faint whiff of something green and spiced, like basil dipped in honey and sun. Cleopatra hands you a cloth-wrapped bundle, and you open it to find a tiny cake of solid perfume, etched with the eye of Horus. You press it under your collarbone, she explains. By morning, your dreams will have stronger opinions than you do. You ask how she got her hands on so many ancient formulas. She grins. 1 librarian, 3 bribes, and a royal marriage proposal I didn't mean. Scholars today debate whether Cleopatra actively studied perfumery through Egypt's sacred texts or relied on temple priestesses to pass knowledge down to her. What's clear is that she had access to formulae dating back over 1,000 years. Some of them likely copied from even older documents that no longer exist. Fragrance here isn't trend. It's ritual. You notice a list etched into one cedar panel. Ingredients paired with effects. Henna bark, clarity blue lotus, surrender, galbanum, boldness, goat fat, grounding. Cleopatra rolls her eyes at this one. Myrrh, divine favor. She points to a shelf labeled Alexandrian Variants, which houses more experimental blends, like frankincense-infused wine reductions, pomegranate oil laced with ground opal, allegedly to enhance passion, though she notes it mostly makes people sneeze, and one ominously labeled papyrus fish blend. You do not ask questions about that one. The scent library also holds scent scrolls, not recipes, but accounts. She reads one aloud, the voice slipping into rhythm as the scribe once wrote, "He arrived with camel dust and juniper on his cloak. She wore cedar, warmed on her skin for hours, and his guards forgot their weapons." Cleopatra looks up, amused. Poetry, yes, but also branding. You chuckle, and she tosses you a scroll. It unfurls easily. This one is drier, more practical, written by a court advisor outlining what perfumes best conceal nerves before a political negotiation. You skim phrases like lavender on the wrist to project calm and sandalwood behind ears to seem older. There's a certain irony you note in controlling perception through fragrance when your political opponents are literally sculpting propaganda out of stone. Cleopatra opens a low drawer and reveals a delicate fan made from ostrich feathers, soaked in neroli and bergamot. Julius thought it was just to cool myself, she says with a smirk. He didn't realize it was also how I conditioned the air between us. You try it. The scent trails like silk. It changes the space, softens the corners of the room. You suddenly wonder how much of Roman diplomacy was conducted under the unknowing influence of invisible citrus mist. And then Cleopatra pulls out something you truly didn't expect. A letter? Folded, sealed, tucked in a tiny wooden box. From a Roman noblewoman, she says, asking me for a recipe. She wanted to impress her dinner guests. I sent her one that smells like fresh figs, crushed laurel, and very expensive silence. You ask if the noblewoman ever thanked her. She sent a bottle of wine, Cleopatra says, sipping imaginary poison from her wrist. It smelled like defeat and raisins. A brief silence settles, warm and filled with drifting sandalwood. You realize Cleopatra's not just documenting the past, she's curating it. Fragrance becomes archive. Each jar and scroll a footnote of a life lived on multiple frequencies. The wind outside shifts. A breeze enters through a carved slit in the wall, lifting the edge of a scroll. Cleopatra catches it with her fingers, her bracelets chiming faintly. Come, she says. Let's walk through the garden before the scent of dusk disappears. As you exit the scent library, one thought lingers. No matter how much Rome chisels or decrees, some legacies are written in air. You follow Cleopatra through a narrow passage lit by small oil lamps, each releasing the faint aroma of roasted almond and fig. The air shifts, cooler and moist, until finally you step into what feels like another world. Her nighttime garden. Not the sun-soaked promenades or formal paths of the palace gardens, no. This is something different. An enclosed space of soft moss underfoot, dark green walls of cypress and myrtle, and a ceiling open to the moon. Night-blooming jasmine coils up trellises, and somewhere unseen a fountain trickles like a whisper. Cleopatra gestures for you to sit on a low-cushioned bench beside her. Scent changes at night, she says, as if continuing a conversation from hours ago. The same rose smells different under moonlight, like it's remembering something it's not supposed to. You nod, unsure whether she's joking. Possibly both. Tonight, she explains, is for testing sleep perfumes. Mixtures meant not to seduce, impress, or command, but to ease the body into rest. You lean back, exhaling, already halfway there. She opens a cedar box and reveals half a dozen scent cones, solid perfume pyramids molded from beeswax and oils, meant to melt slowly in the heat of your skin. You remember reading about them somewhere, maybe in a dusty museum label. Ancient Egyptians often wore them on their heads during feasts. But Cleopatra's version is subtler. They're designed not to melt in the sun, but in sleep. She presses one gently into your palm. It smells of chamomile, frankincense, and something faintly like fresh rain. For overthinking, she says. You don't argue. As she lights a small lamp nearby, she shares the theory. Certain scents slow the pulse. Others steady the breath. Some, if layered right, can ease memories out of the mind without deleting them entirely. The goal, she says, is not forgetting. It's resting with your memories without them fighting back. She gives a wry smile. I rarely manage it. You sit quietly as she begins dabbing the perfumes onto thin strips of linen. One is labeled Temple Blend, used by priestesses during meditative rituals. Another is marked Papyrus Room, a scent she crafted to mimic the dusty coolness of the royal library. It smells faintly of dried ink and old laughter. And then there's a final one, sealed with green wax and no name. You raise an eyebrow. She hesitates, then uncorks it. The smell is delicate. Violets, myrrh, and something indefinable. Not floral, not herbal. Something closer to the moment before sleep itself. I wore this, she says, the first night after Caesar died. The garden stills. Even the fountain seems to hush. Historians still argue whether I grieved him, feared him, or used him, she continues softly, as if those are mutually exclusive. She rolls the vial between her fingers. Sometimes a perfume doesn't just remind you of someone. It reminds you how complicated you were around them. You sit in silence, letting the thought unfurl. Across the garden, a pair of cats chase moths beneath the pomegranate trees. One leaps, misses, lands with royal indifference. Changing the subject with practiced ease, Cleopatra picks up a scroll titled Sleep Odors of the Royal Menagerie. You peer over her shoulder and discover she once commissioned perfumes meant to mimic the fur of her favorite animals. Yes, she confirms. The leopard's was a disaster, smelled like damp leather and judgment. But the ibis's? Divine! You can't help but smile. She invites you to test one final blend. This one is light, almost not there at all. A whisper of something sweet and grassy, like hay after rain. This, she says, is the scent of surrender, of letting go. You close your eyes and suddenly the moss beneath your feet feels like a mattress. The air shifts again, cooler. You realize the scent isn't just calming, it's disarming, as if each breath releases a knot you didn't know you were carrying. Cleopatra watches you for a moment, amused. Roman generals would have wept if they knew how vulnerable they were around jasmine and linden blossom. You imagine Mark Antony, sword in hand, pausing mid-siege to ask what that delightful smell is. You don't share the image. Some jokes are better when kept to yourself. The hour deepens. The moon has climbed higher, casting silver outlines on the hedges and the half-sleeping lilies. Cleopatra tosses a final cone into a dish over a lamp. It melts with a faint hiss, releasing a scent of cedar, lime flower, and faintest mint. You ask her what it's called. She doesn't answer right away. Then, hope. But not the loud kind. The garden seems to breathe with you. As the scent of cedar and lime flower curls gently around you, Cleopatra rises and beckons you to follow her down a winding staircase, the steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. You descend into a cool, dimly lit cellar filled with rows of amphorae and jars, some cracked and dusty, others polished and gleaming. The air is heavy with the scent of aged wine, honey, and a hint of something metallic. This, Cleopatra says, her voice lowering conspiratorially, is where perfumes meet potions and powders. She gestures to a wide table strewn with ingredients, dried herbs, crushed minerals, animal fats rendered into soft blocks, and vibrant pigments. Beauty and utility often overlapped in ancient Egypt. You watch as she picks up a small vial filled with a dark red liquid. Kohl, she explains. Not just for eyes, it was believed to protect against the evil eye and soothe inflammation. She traces a finger along the rim and smells it. Historians still argue whether it was more magical or medicinal. She pulls out a small box of crushed crocodile dung. You blink. Don't worry, she says with a grin. It was a sunscreen ingredient. Ancient sunscreen, like SPF UW. You both laugh softly, the strange humor of history settling in. Cleopatra continues, describing other common additives: honey to soften the skin, frankincense for purification, and a rare resin called bdellium that smelled faintly of lemon and pine. We believed scents could influence everything, from mood to memory to fertility. You lean forward, intrigued, as she recounts a story of a perfume blend given to a bride to wear on her wedding night, designed to inspire passion and fidelity. The recipe included rose, myrrh, cinnamon, and something called spikenard, a herb so rare it was worth more than gold. Cleopatra's eyes gleam as she mentions that spikenard was rumored to have intoxicating properties, but she confesses she never tested it herself. As she talks, you notice a small, ornately carved box sitting on the table. She opens it to reveal a collection of tiny bones, beads, and amulets. These were mixed into some perfumes as talismans, charms for protection or luck. You find it fascinating how fragrance and superstition blend seamlessly here. She picks up a folded papyrus and reads aloud a passage describing a bath ritual. The bath was more than cleansing, as she says. It was an experience. Oils, perfumes, and powders combined to soothe the body and spirit. The ritual included olive oil infused with lavender and mint, sprinkled with flower petals and accompanied by soft music. You imagine sinking into such a bath after a long day, the scents mingling with warm water and quiet. Cleopatra smiles and says, "Romans borrowed much of our bathing culture, but they added their own flair." She recounts how Roman baths incorporated perfumed oils, but also employed steam and massage. She remarks that historians debate how much perfume was worn after baths versus during. Some say it was the grand finale, others that scent lingered through the entire experience. You ask about the differences between Egyptian and Roman perfume preferences. Cleopatra gestures broadly. Romans liked their scents bold and complex, layers of pine, spice, and citrus. Egyptians preferred softer, floral notes, but weren't afraid to add something wild like frankincense or myrrh. You chuckle imagining Cleopatra trying to explain the subtlety of Egyptian perfume to a Roman who expected a fragrance to announce his arrival like a herald. Before you leave the cellar, Cleopatra picks up a small vial filled with a deep purple liquid. This was my favorite, a blend of violet and rose with a touch of musk. It was subtle but memorable, much like me. She winks. You realize how much more there is to ancient perfume than just pleasant smells. It's a language of power, identity, and even protection. Each drop carries stories, beliefs, and sometimes secrets meant to linger long after the wearer is gone. You step back into the warm air, the scent of violet still clinging to your fingers, ready to follow Cleopatra further on this fragrant journey. You and Cleopatra climb back up to the palace's main floor, where the sun has dipped lower, casting long shadows and bathing everything in a honeyed glow. She leads you through a grand hall filled with ornate tapestries and low tables, bearing delicate dishes and glassware. The air here smells faintly of roasted figs and freshly ground coriander, a dinner being prepared somewhere nearby. Cleopatra gestures toward a slender silver bowl filled with a thick golden paste. "This is my secret blend for the skin," she says, dipping a finger and offering you a taste. Surprising sweetness with a hint of bitter herbs, almost like honey mixed with sage. We believed that scent didn't only come from perfumes, but from the body itself. You nod slowly, savoring the unusual combination. She explains how Egyptians used scented oils not just to mask odors, but to nourish and protect the skin from the harsh sun and dust. This paste, she says, was often made from sesame oil infused with rosemary and a touch of frankincense, sometimes mixed with crushed almonds. As you listen, she recalls how Roman society prized a pale complexion, associating it with leisure and class, while Egyptians admired a golden, sun-kissed glow. The contrast made Cleopatra chuckle softly, an ancient version of today's beauty debates. Next, she pulls out a small wooden box filled with combs, pins, and hair ribbons. Hair was another canvas for scent. She picks up a delicate comb and tells you about the oils used to scent and condition hair: jasmine, almond, and sometimes a rare resin called labdanum. Cleopatra recounts how Roman women often wore scented wreaths and even carried pomanders to keep the air around them fragrant. You ask if Cleopatra herself had a favorite hair scent. She smirks. A mix of violet and cedar with a dash of myrrh. I like to leave a subtle trail. The conversation shifts to daily routines. Cleopatra shares a fascinating but little-known fact. Royal women often bathed in mixtures containing milk and honey, both for their scent and their moisturizing properties. This practice was not just indulgence, but part of a carefully maintained ritual. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra actually bathed in donkey milk, or if it's just a rumor spun by Roman poets, she says with a raised eyebrow. You imagine the gentle caress of warm milk on skin, mingled with soft scents. The luxury of such a bath in a world without modern plumbing feels almost unimaginable. And yet, here you are, transported. She then describes the process of applying scented oils after bathing, a methodical ritual involving massage and meditation. Cleopatra tells you how scent was believed to influence mood, health, and even dreams. You recall the perfumes from the garden meant to ease sleep, and realize how integral fragrance was to every aspect of daily life. Cleopatra pauses by a window, watching the sunset deepen. Romans and Egyptians shared much, but they approached beauty and scent differently. Romans were louder, more ostentatious. Egyptians, subtler, more spiritual. You ask if these differences ever caused tension. She smiles knowingly. Perfume politics can be as tricky as any throne game. Before you leave the hall, Cleopatra offers you a small vial of the skin paste to take with you. For when you need a reminder that scent is more than smell, it's memory, identity, and comfort. You tuck it carefully into your bag, feeling the warm weight of history in your palm. You find yourself wandering into a quieter wing of the palace, where tapestries hang heavy and the light filters softly through lattice windows, casting intricate shadows on the cool stone floor. Cleopatra moves with a slow, deliberate grace, as if the scent of the place itself guides her steps. Here, she explains, was where the artisans worked. The perfumers, the apothecaries, the skilled hands that blended scents into the delicate bottles and jars you've seen earlier. The air smells faintly of resin and crushed petals, mixed with the earthy tang of drying herbs. Cleopatra pulls aside a curtain to reveal a small workshop cluttered with tools. Tiny mortars and pestles, glass funnels, brass scales, and wooden boxes packed with mysterious powders. She picks up a piece of dried rose and crushes it between her fingers, releasing a soft, sweet aroma. Every scent begins here, she says softly. Not just with flowers, but with patience and precision. She shows you a recipe for one of her favorite perfumes, painstakingly recorded on a scrap of papyrus. The ingredients include rare lotus flower essence, ambergris, and a resin called storax, each painstakingly sourced from distant lands. The luxury of scent came from its rarity, she explains. Some ingredients were worth more than a soldier's monthly pay. You can't help but marvel at how much care went into each bottle. No wonder Roman nobles paid fortunes for Egyptian perfumes. Cleopatra turns your attention to an unusual ingredient, musk harvested from a wild deer found only in the mountains beyond the Nile. This scent was controversial, she admits. Some said it was overpowering, even dangerous. Historians still argue whether musk was used more for allure or as a medicinal aid. She laughs quietly. I never cared much for musk, but my advisors insisted. Said it added authority. You peer around and spot a small jar of what looks like finely ground amber. Cleopatra explains how amber was often heated to release a warm, resinous smoke during ceremonies, believed to cleanse spaces and invite positive spirits. The Romans took this idea and ran with it, turning it into incense rituals in their grand temples. A faint smile crosses her lips as she mentions the odd contrast. Egyptians loved delicate personal scents, while Romans reveled in grand displays of fragrance that filled entire rooms. Your curiosity is piqued when Cleopatra shows you a small vial containing a cloudy, pale liquid labeled sleep mist. This was a personal experiment, she confides. A spray to lightly scent the air around the bed, made with lavender and a hint of spikenard. You try it, the mist settling gently around you like a soft breeze. The scent is calming, familiar, almost hypnotic. She shares that historians debate whether such sleep aids were common or reserved for royalty, and whether their effects were more psychological than physical. Either way, Cleopatra considers it one of her most successful inventions. You feel yourself relax, the workshop fading into the background as the mist lingers in the air. The blend of science, art, and superstition in this small room is surprisingly comforting, like discovering a secret code written in scent. Cleopatra leans in and whispers, "Remember, the best perfumes tell stories. Not just about the wearer, but about the world they inhabit." You breathe deeply, letting the scent carry you toward dreams. You follow Cleopatra out of the workshop and into a quieter courtyard, where twilight softens the edges of marble columns, and the scent of night-blooming flowers hangs thick in the warm air. She gestures toward a small pavilion, draped with sheer curtains that flutter gently in the evening breeze. "This," she says, "is where scent met ceremony." You sit on a cushioned bench as she begins to describe the role of perfume in rituals and festivals, a vital thread woven through the fabric of both Egyptian and Roman spiritual life. She explains that scents were believed to bridge the earthly and divine, carrying prayers and intentions on invisible currents. You picture priests and priestesses moving slowly through temple halls, carrying censers filled with incense like frankincense and myrrh, their soft smoke weaving patterns in the dim light. Cleopatra notes how the Egyptians associated certain scents with specific gods: cinnamon with Osiris, lotus with Hathor. Romans adapted many of these practices, she continues, adding their own favorites like rosemary and laurel. Their ceremonies often involved elaborate processions and public displays, where scent played a part in creating awe and reverence. You're reminded of the grand Roman triumphs, where victorious generals marched through the streets amid clouds of perfumed smoke, an intoxicating mix of celebration and power. Cleopatra points to a small bowl of crushed rose petals and lemon balm on a low table nearby. She explains how these were scattered during celebrations, both for their fragrance and as symbols of purity and renewal. You ask about the use of scent in more private rituals. She smiles and tells you about personal anointing ceremonies, where individuals would be rubbed with oils and perfumes to mark transitions like marriage, motherhood, or mourning. The blending of scent and touch created a deeply intimate experience, she says, carrying layers of meaning beyond the physical. Historians still debate how much of these rituals were public spectacle versus personal spiritual practice, Cleopatra adds, noting that much of what we know comes from fragmented texts and artistic depictions. She then shares a lesser-known fact. Some perfumes were designed specifically to be worn during sleep rituals, believed to aid in prophetic dreams or communication with the divine. These blends often contained rare herbs like spikenard and saffron, mixed carefully to balance potency and subtlety. You close your eyes briefly, imagining drifting into such a sleep, soft scents swirling around you, blurring the boundaries between waking and dreaming. Cleopatra's voice softens as she adds, "Scent in ritual was never just about smell. It was about presence, memory, and the sacred breath of life." The night deepens, and the pavilion seems to hold its breath along with you. Outside, a soft breeze carries the mingled scents of jasmine and myrrh, a whispered promise of calm. You settle back, letting the gentle weight of history and fragrance lull you closer to rest. The cool night air follows you and Cleopatra as you wander through the palace gardens, now cloaked in shadows and bathed in moonlight. The faint rustle of leaves mingles with the distant chirping of crickets, and every breath you take carries the soft fragrance of night-blooming flowers. Jasmine, honeysuckle, and something earthy and mysterious you can't quite place. Cleopatra gestures toward a low stone wall draped in vines. Gardens like this weren't just for beauty, she says. They were carefully cultivated scent libraries. You step closer to a cluster of flowers with pale, waxy petals that seem to glow under the moon's silver light. Cleopatra explains these are night-blooming cereus, prized for their fleeting, intoxicating fragrance that could fill a room for hours. She leads you along narrow paths lined with herbs, rosemary, mint, lavender, used not only in perfumes but also in cooking and medicine. Cleopatra points out a small patch of spikenard, its leaves and flowers delicate and unassuming. Rare and precious, she whispers. It was said to calm the mind and inspire dreams. As you inhale, she recounts how the garden's scents formed the basis for many royal perfumes and personal oils. The careful blending of these plants was an art as much as a science, one that required patience and a keen nose. Cleopatra pauses at a fountain surrounded by blooming lotus flowers, their petals unfolding slowly in the moonlight. The lotus was sacred, she says, symbolizing rebirth and purity. Its fragrance was subtle but unforgettable. You ask if Romans shared this reverence for garden scents. She nods. They loved gardens too, though their taste leaned more towards citrus and pine. Roman gardens were places of leisure, politics, and poetry, all tinged with scent. You laugh softly, imagining senators sniffing lemon blossoms during heated debates. Cleopatra then shares a charming but little-known fact. Some perfumers used honey to trap floral scents before distillation, an early form of scent preservation. Think of it as ancient floral jam, she jokes. Historians still debate the exact methods used for perfume extraction in Cleopatra's time, whether they preferred enfleurage, distillation, or simple maceration in oils. The truth is likely a blend of all. You find yourself drawn to a small patch of night jasmine, its heavy, sweet aroma wrapping around you like a soft blanket. Cleopatra explains that jasmine was often saved for evening wear, its scent said to promote relaxation and affection. The garden's scents weave together in a quiet symphony, a sensory journey through time and place. You realize how these living treasures connected people to nature, culture, and each other. Cleopatra smiles, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. To wear perfume was to carry a piece of this garden wherever you went. You breathe deeply one last time, the mingled scents settling in your mind as you prepare to leave this tranquil sanctuary. As the first hints of dawn begin to pale the night sky, Cleopatra leads you inside once more, this time to a quiet chamber filled with soft cushions and delicate fabrics that smell faintly of musk and rose. The room feels like a gentle embrace after the coolness of the garden. She tells you that personal grooming and fragrance were essential parts of a royal morning routine, designed to prepare the body and mind for the day ahead. You picture the slow, deliberate motions of attendants bringing warm water infused with herbs, small bowls of scented oils, and fine combs. Cleopatra explains that one of her favorite morning rituals involved anointing her body with a blend of oils made from almond, myrrh, and a rare flower called the Syrian iris. This mixture was said to refresh the skin and awaken the senses without overwhelming them. You lean in, imagining the silky texture of oil warmed by the sun and the subtle floral spice aroma settling onto the skin. Perfume wasn't just a decoration, Cleopatra says quietly. It was an invisible armor against the unpredictability of the day. You ask about hair care and the ancient remedies used to maintain those famous locks. Cleopatra chuckles softly and reveals that despite all the grandeur, sometimes a simple rinse with beer, yes, beer was used to keep hair shiny and clean. The Romans had their own concoctions, including vinegar rinses and scented pomades. There's a playful glint in her eye as she recounts rumors that some courtiers added crushed pearls to their hair oils for a shimmering effect, though historians still argue whether this was practical or poetic exaggeration. The conversation drifts to oral hygiene, a surprisingly fragrant affair. Cleopatra mentions the use of powdered herbs like mint and myrrh, mixed with charcoal or crushed eggshells, to clean teeth and freshen breath. The Romans, she says, had similar routines, sometimes employing urine for its ammonia content. Perhaps not the most soothing image, but an effective method nonetheless. You smile, imagining the scent combinations people carried with them. The mix of sweet, herbal, and earthy notes that lingered in breath, hair, and skin. It's oddly comforting, a reminder that personal scent has always been deeply tied to identity and confidence. Cleopatra offers you a small vial of her morning oil blend, warm and lightly fragrant to take with you. May it remind you that every day is a fresh beginning, scented with possibility. You close your eyes, letting the delicate aromas linger as the soft morning light fills the chamber, promising a new day filled with whispered stories and fragrant memories. The day moves forward, and you find yourself seated beside Cleopatra as she recounts the surprising role scent played in ancient medicine. She explains that perfumes and oils were not just for pleasure, but also key ingredients in remedies and wellness rituals. You listen as she describes how fragrant plants like frankincense, myrrh, and rosemary were infused into balms and salves, believed to aid digestion, soothe headaches, and even support the heart. The blending of scent and healing was a delicate art, rooted in both observation and belief. Cleopatra shares a curious anecdote about crocodile dung, which was used in a salve intended to treat eye infections. The idea sounds bizarre to modern ears, but she assures you it was one of many ancient remedies that combined practicality with ritual. Historians still argue about the efficacy of some treatments, whether they were truly healing or more placebo in symbolism. Either way, scent was central to the experience of wellness. You ask about Roman approaches to medical scent. Cleopatra smiles and mentions the widespread use of vinegar and aromatic herbs in their baths and healing rooms, designed to cleanse both body and spirit. She pauses to recall the special perfumes reserved for funerary rituals, intended to honor the dead and comfort the living. These scents, often heavier and more resinous, marked the passage between worlds, a fragrant farewell. In the midst of this, Cleopatra confesses a lesser-known fact. Some perfumes were believed to protect against evil spirits or bad luck. Wearing them was like carrying a small talisman, wrapped in fragrant mystery. You imagine the care with which these oils were applied, a blend of faith, science, and tradition. The scent was a form of communication with the unseen, a subtle armor against fear and uncertainty. Cleopatra's voice softens as she reflects on how these practices connected people across cultures and centuries. We all sought comfort in scent, whether to heal, to protect, or simply to remind ourselves we were alive. You inhale deeply, the mingling fragrances wrapping around you like a warm shawl. The ancient alchemy of scent and health feels more intimate than ever. The afternoon light fades slowly as Cleopatra leads you to a quiet chamber where shelves are lined with small, intricately carved boxes and delicate glass bottles. The storage of her most treasured perfumes. The air here is heavy with a mixture of aged wood, dried herbs, and faint traces of exotic spices. She explains that preserving perfume was a subtle challenge. The delicate essences could fade or spoil if not stored carefully. Some ancient perfumers used airtight containers sealed with wax, while others kept their collections in dark, cool rooms to protect the fragile aromas. You reach out and gently lift a small bottle filled with a deep amber liquid. Cleopatra smiles and reveals that this one contains a blend of saffron, cinnamon, and rose, a favorite for special occasions. The scent is warm and inviting, like a memory you haven't yet lived. She shares that perfumes often carried hidden meanings, with different ingredients symbolizing love, power, or purity. Wearing a particular scent could signal your social status or intentions, much like a carefully chosen outfit today. You learn about the curious use of certain scents as subtle messages. Frankincense for wisdom, myrrh for healing, and jasmine for devotion. Cleopatra notes that in some circles, knowing how to read a person's perfume was an unspoken language. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, whether it was limited to court intrigue or a more common social custom. Regardless, the complexity of fragrance politics adds an unexpected layer to your understanding of ancient life. Cleopatra opens a finely decorated box to reveal powders mixed with ground pearls and crushed gemstones. These were sprinkled into baths or mixed into oils to create a sparkling effect on the skin. "A little luxury for the eyes," she says with a wink. You chuckle at the thought of someone shimmering under the Egyptian sun like a walking treasure chest. Before you leave, Cleopatra hands you a tiny vial labeled Evening Whisper. The scent is soft, blending lavender and spikenard with a touch of cedarwood, designed to calm the senses and ease the transition from day to night. You breathe it in slowly, feeling the gentle embrace of the fragrance settle deep within you. The room dims as shadows lengthen, and you realize the power of perfume is not just in the nose, but in the memories and moods it evokes. Cleopatra's final words linger. In scent, we find a bridge between the fleeting and the eternal. As twilight turns to night, you and Cleopatra settle in a quiet room, where soft cushions and woven tapestries create a cocoon of calm. The scent of sandalwood drifts gently through the air, mingling with faint hints of jasmine and honey. A perfect blend to close the day. Cleopatra reflects on how perfume was woven into every aspect of her life, from the simplest daily routines to the grandest public ceremonies. It was more than just a fragrance. It was an extension of identity, mood, and memory. She shares one last quietly amusing story about a Roman senator who famously insisted on wearing an overpowering blend of cinnamon and myrrh, earning the nickname the Walking Bazaar. Cleopatra laughs softly, noting that scent, like people, could be wonderfully unpredictable. Historians still debate whether his bold choices were a political statement or simply poor judgment. Either way, it reminds you that fragrance has long been a language of personality and power. As you breathe in the calming mixture of scents around you, Cleopatra encourages you to think about the perfumes you've encountered. Not just the ingredients or recipes, but the feelings they evoke. She suggests that the next time you catch a familiar scent, it might just carry a whisper from ancient times, a delicate thread connecting you to the past. You close your eyes, the soft perfumes wrapping you in a soothing embrace. The gentle hum of history and fragrance blends with the quiet rhythm of your breath. Now you feel yourself drifting, carried by the scents of lotus, myrrh, and spikenard into a peaceful, dream-filled night. The soft twilight deepens as the scents gently fade, leaving a calm stillness in the air. You feel a sense of comfort and connection, as if the stories and fragrances have woven a delicate tapestry around your mind, easing the day's worries away. Remember, the quiet beauty of history is often found in these small details, like a carefully blended perfume, that whisper their secrets when we listen closely. As you settle deeper into rest, let the subtle fragrances and gentle tales guide you toward a peaceful sleep, wrapped in the timeless embrace of scent and story. Good night.